Hey everyone, Eggman here with another video, and the One Piece card game Super Pre-Release is just days away as of recording, and I am so dang excited to actually have some physical cards in my hand. I've been doing some tabletop testing. I've printed out some proxies to test. I've been playing this game for like 3 or 4 months at this point with Anime Expo, and then I was also helping teach it at Gen Con, so I am ready for this Super Pre-Release. And I want to make sure that you guys are also ready for your Super Pre-Releases in these next couple of days, just because I know a lot of you guys are excited. A lot of you guys haven't had chances to play this card game, and a lot of you guys want to win your Super Pre-Release. So I want to make it so you guys have a good shot, and just a lot of tips and tricks that I've picked up by learning it, but also kind of some common pitfalls I've been seeing that other people learning this game for the first time are kind of falling into, and everything else. So I want you to be able to watch this video, pick up some tips, and have a good shot at winning your Super Pre-Release. The only reason you should lose is if you are also playing someone else who watched this video, and that is the goal for this guy. So we're just going to go over some generic tips and tricks, and then we're also going to go over each leader or each star deck individually, since this is a sealed format, and just some kind of, I don't know, it's a very short and small card pool, so you should know pretty much all the cards that exist right now and kind of the best plays and stuff. So also, this is going to be using Tabletop Simulator. I made a video, I'll have it linked in the description. If you guys want to play online, that is the best way to do it, and there's a whole tutorial on how to do it. We're just going to go over it from there, but that's what we're using today, in case you guys are wondering and want to, do a couple reps before your own Super Pre-Release. But first, let's go into our generic tips and tricks. To start us off, I do want to talk about probably the most important thing about this card game. It is Dawn, and just how to manage it. It's kind of like the unique thing, at least compared to other Bandai card games, where the resource system, you get just an extra deck to get resources from. Not only can you suspend this to pay for costs, like paying this for 2, but you can also attach it to your cards to give the boost for this. And honestly, I don't see a lot, like when people start playing this game the first time, I don't feel like they're using this mechanic as much as they should, because adding this boost actually can be very impactful and kind of force your opponent to discard cards in hand and everything else, especially in a game like this where there's not a lot of card drop. Making your opponent discard cards feels really good. So generically too, like I'll see someone do something like this where they'll swing at their leader, they're not they don't want to pay any Dawn, then they'll say after that they'll play the Kobe for 4, and then they have this one floating Dawn in here because they didn't think like, oh, what was my plays for the turns, right? So before you do anything, before you pay cost for anything, you should look at your hand, say, what is it I want to play this turn, how much is that all going to cost, and then what is my extra Dawn count afterwards. If you're able to kind of think and sequence that a little bit better, you're able to say, you know what, I can make this a 6k swing, and since it's a 6k, your opponent might have to discard another card, or they might actually take the damage otherwise, so like that's impactful. So by using 1 Dawn, you made your opponent discard 1 card, which is great. And then for 4 afterwards, you can do this. So it's just solid to kind of just make sure you do your plays. And I just see a lot of people who play this game for the first time not do that. They'll just pass their turn with like 2 or 3 Dawn open that they could have used for a swing to put more pressure, or do something else, and they just simply don't. Going from there, I also real quick too, just to talk about Dawn, 2k, if you really want to try to like pressure your opponent, 7k or like plus 2k on your 5k leader is definitely like where you want to try to get to every time, just because this means that if they have a counter card, for example in this green deck, it is the a poo. So this is a 2k counters, which is the highest. Some decks have 2, some have 4, it just depends on the deck. But this is a counter for plus 2k, and so because of that, if I swing like 6k, they can only have to like discard 1 card to get out of it. But if you make it a 7k, they'd have to do a 2k and a 1k, or even just 3 1ks to get out of it. So like something as big as this is kind of like 7k is usually what you want to get to at 5k leaders if you really want to put some pressure on your opponent there. So highly recommend doing that. And from there, I just kind of want to talk about these skill-less cards. And also, something that I think is like a trap to a lot of this game is these 1 and 2 drop skill-less cards, right? You'll have like your turn 1 and 2, you'll have like 3 Dawn open, and you're like, well, I don't want to just like not play something, right? I think playing the Heat for 2 and then the Eustass Kid swing in for 6 is probably the play. But most of these skill-less cards are not very good, especially in green, where green can just have your leader attack again, and a card in hand can represent another swing with the Eustass Kid active main. Sometimes it's just like, okay, I make this an 8 and swing in, and your opponent's probably going to take the card, and then you have these for defense. It's just way better to have these skillless cards as defense. The counters are very impactful, and yeah, I just see people play them for 1, and then if you, like, for example, playing this Beppo here, right? It's for 1, and then you invest 2 energy to make it, or sorry, 2 Dawn to make it a 5k, and then you're oppressing your opponent. So for 3 Dawn, you're pressuring with 1 5k swing, or for the same 3 Dawn, you're pressuring with 1 8k swing. Right, so that's kind of like the math for it there. Obviously, it's 2 swings, so that could be impactful too. But it's just works out more unless like you need to get 2 damage in. Just investing into like a big boy and then having stuff for defense is just strictly better than playing these skillless cards more times than not. The 3 and 5 drops you can kind of get away with, just because, especially like the 4 drop. 4 drop is probably the best for the curve, just because it's a 6k, which means that your opponent will have to invest a swing and some Dawn to get rid of these guys, and you can counter out of it, which is nice. 3k can just like do damage for free, but like the 4 drops are usually kind of worth it. And so you can play those guys, but 1 and 2 drops should almost always be used in hand for counting. So, and then also there is something to say about sequencing. So let's say we have this this amount of Dawn here, and we'll go to some more specific sequencing when we go to each different starter deck. But something to notice is, like, if you swing here with this first and then you play the Kobe, that's usually the better. And if you wanted to do the extra Dawn there, you can. But there are times where you can attack with your leader into your opponent's life. They'll have something like a Gum Gum pistol, or just something that triggers in life. And then if you paid 4 to play this, and then what happens, like something happens to this card, you just lost 4 Dawn, which is devastating. So make sure that you're swinging at the right times, being able to, and that's why, like, the pre-planning your turn and your Dawn management is really big. So you can say, okay, I know I want to play this Kobe, so for 6 I swing in, cool, and then for 4 I can play this. I'm tapped out Dawn wise. I use all my Dawn as efficient as I can. I have the 6k body that my opponent wouldn't have been able to interact with after the attack, and I just kind of go from there. So because I just see people being like, oh, I'll play this for 4, and now that I've played every card that I want to do, then I'll put the extra Dawn underneath my leader or something, which is not the word. I'd say that's fine, but you can get into some situations where you get punished for that, and you have to be kind of careful. So anyways, that is just kind of the generic stuff. I would also say, don't be afraid to take life. In Dragon Ball Super, taking life is usually pretty understood. But the thing you kind of have to recognize is efficiently taking life. If you can, if your opponent just sends a 5k swing, using a 1k counter, discarding 1 card to save 1 life is worth it, especially early game, because then later game they're going to say, like, okay, well, we're going to swing in 7k, and so we have to get out of it kind of aggressively there. So I think you should just be careful with that. But taking cards from your life is not the worst thing, especially because it's a form of card draw, and there's not a lot of card draw in this game, so it's kind of impactful for that. But with that, we're done with kind of the general tips and tricks, and let's just kind of go to the leader per leader, starting with the Luffy leader. Luffy. Don't play Luffy. He's the worst one. Kaido. But seriously, I will say, like, some people will have to be playing Luffy, and that's fine. And obviously he's the poster boy for the entire series and card game, so people will be playing it. He's not terrible, and honestly, the leader is a very good leader in this game. It's just the starter deck is a little bit clunky, and sometimes you just don't see what you need to do. You're just kind of stuck in hand. So if you do really want to play with this, a couple of choice tips I have for you is, 1, you almost always want to see Nami turn 1. It just generates a bunch of value for you. Give one of your leaders, or like, it's just a second proc of this Luffy, which means you can double up on your Dawn usage there. And honestly, like, the big thing about this deck is that it has so much like free Dawn and like management with that, but then you just like really easily run out of things to do, because like the top end of this deck is this 5 drop Luffy. Like, that's the most expensive card in this deck, and they just have a lot of Dawn to do like a bunch of stuff. But there are ways to play this and to do well with it. I'd just say it's a little bit trickier than anything else. So I would also say some other advice for this deck is, do not play this card. Like, do not play this on the board. It is strictly not worth it. It's a 2k counter that is infinitely more powerful in your hand than giving something 2 rested Dawns, especially since there's just never going to be a reason for it. And like, having this like be a 3k that you can make a 5k next turn is fine, but like, it's almost always just better in your hand. I do not recommend playing this card ever. Just keep it in your hand there, and just keep going. Like, you should probably try to play as many of your cards without any counter costs, because they're just going to be dead in hand otherwise. And like playing a Sanji for 2 instead of playing like a Robin for 3 is probably still worth it, especially since there's just so much extra Dawn that you can manage with this deck. So if on turn 3, for example, so you have 3 Dawn here, you could play this Robin for 1 or for 3 and you have a 5k out. But that also means that this is going to be stuck in your hand and then it won't be able to do anything. So instead you could do the Sanji for 2. You could put 1 underneath it just by the leader effect and 1 for in general. You have a 6k that you're swinging with immediately, and then you have your Luffy. And then on the defense side, you can have this Nico Robin to try to get out of it. So just kind of look at that. I've just played so many games, and like there's just so many cards that don't have counters in them. So there's the Zoro, there's the Jinbei, and a lot of them are 3 drops or lower, which means that there's a lot of removal for them too. It's just kind of stinky because the Zoro is super cool, but just play, giving a Dawn to give it plus 1k power, which is on both players' turns, so that's kind of cool. It's a 6k on your opponent's turn, a 7k on your turn for 1 Dawn. But having all these kind of Dawn cheap plays and like resource management when there's not like a big boy to drop later in the game is kind of hurtful for the deck. So I think it's just kind of the idea of like, it's Luffy and it is aggressive, and when there's more cards to play with the list, and honestly just more expensive cards to play with it, this leader does get better in the first set. But just as a starter deck, he's just been consistently the worst one. There are ways to win with it, but it's just a little kind of whack from there. So that's all I have. If you guys have any opinions on what I'm saying about this, please let me know. But I suggest pretty much one of the other 3 if you want to try to really get a shot for winning one of these.
Kaido.
For Kaido, probably the most important thing is finding the Onigashima. This is just, I hate it, but like if you see this within your first 2 turns, you have a really good shot at winning. And if you don't, you probably will not win, and you'll see these later and you'll never find time to play them, and it just feels really bad. But if you play this on turn 2, you are feeling super good. Being able to ramp even if it's suspended every turn is so good, especially in a deck that has so many Dawn minus effects. It just shifts the tide to you infinitely. So it's just so good in a deck like this. So you always want to hard mulligan for these Onigashimas, and if you don't see them, then at least try to find a Jack. Jack is you discard 1 card of your hand, add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck into your cost area active. Like this 1 ramp is fine. It's and you get a body off it. It's a 4k body, so it's not too bad, but that's just something you have to really try to get there. It's just kind of stinks because like I really do like what purple is. It's kind of like a control deck in a lot of ways, and from there, and then also it's super okay for this deck to just not play anything turn 1 and 2 if you don't find Onigashima or Jack. Like don't feel pressured to have to play cards just because you feel like you have to be doing something. You're okay with just turn 2, like I've got nothing better to do, I'm just going to have an 8k swing in your leader and then just pressure you from there, especially because so many of your cards that you can play later are kind of reactive. So for example, we do have like the King, we also have the Who's Who. Both of these are very good at removing our opponent's cards. So this Dawn -1 to pop something with 3 or less, and this is Dawn -1 to pop something with 6 or less. So that is there. And you do have to be really knowledgeable on what, if you are on an even or an odd amount of Dawn for a lot of this, just because getting to King on like turn 3 can be really important. So if you're going second, you get there automatically, and if you are going first, you get there on turn 4 if you have Onigashima, for example. So, or sorry, turn 3 if you have Onigashima, because you have 1, then you have 2, and you rest 1 here, and then the next turn you get 2 more. So that is something to consider there. And the big thing too about this Kaido is you have to make sure like the how you use his -7 effect is really dependent. Like that's kind of like the big way you either win or lose this game, is whether you can successfully use the -7 effect. And just to know, so like you put 5, like this can't win you the game ever. It can just put your opponent from 1 to 0, and you still have to get that final swing. So that is something you have to be aware of. Like if this could win you the game, this leader would be busted. But because like this Dawn -7 just means like you have to kind of, like best case, you have 10 Dawn open. You do the -7, so all of them go back into your here, and then you have 3 Dawn to kind of work with, right? And so, and it's just like an 8k swing, which is moderately, survivable in a lot of ways. So you have to make sure you have like a large body like King, or even like the 9-drop Kaido from the set to start, like to actually be able to pressure that last bit of damage for you. So that's something to consider. This Kaido is also fantastically good. You want to see him like every game. It's a 10k that's rush. Your opponent will like never be able to get this off the board with Star Dex cards unless they just put like 10 Dawn on their leader and just swing at it, which is already good enough for you. It pops something with a cost of 6 or less, and it swings in because it gets rush. It's such a good card, especially it's Dawn -5, but it's totally worth it. It wins you so much of your games, and highly considered because you can go like, let's say you're at 10, you Dawn -5, so you're at 5, but it's only -4 because Onigashima. Next turn you get 2 more Dawn, and then you Onigashima again to go to back to 9, and then you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 off the leader and still have this to make a 12k swing to finish the game kind of thing. So that's like which is why like Onigashima is just, it's such a good card, and it sucks that the game is dependent on if you see it or not. So but if you see it, you're in a really, really good spot. Also real quick, this is just kind of generic knowledge, but when you do the Dawn minus effects, they can be from anywhere. They can be underneath it. So for example, let's say this is your board and you have 7 Dawn here. You can just, and let's say your opponent has 2 life left, right? They have 2 life, so you want to try to win this turn. You can put all 7 underneath your Kaido, make this a 12k swing. They take the damage unless they get out of it. And then you can -7 to put them down from 1 to 0, and then swing in with your big Kaido there. So you can, that is like a viable way to win the game. Like if they're at 2 life specifically, you can put everything, then minus everything from underneath with the effect. Even though you've used the Dawn already, you've attached it, you can kind of go from there. Last thing is that playing ulti to play page 1 is like a minor trap. It just depends on where you're at in the game. A 5k and a 6k is kind of cool. It's Dawn -1, which kind of stinks. And you have 2 less cards in hand, which means you have -3k counter in hand because you wasted these 2 guys. But if you're like, there are some times where it's useful, and obviously you don't see this all the time, but don't feel pressured to play ulti just because you also have a page 1 in hand. It's okay to just have this in your hand for your defense and just kind of hang out with it. You don't have to play it. Don't feel pressured to get the combo off. It's not usually worth it half the time. So that's Kaido, and let's move on to the next one.
Crocodile.
For Crocodile, he's honestly my favorite of the Star Deck meta, only if I get to have 2 of the Star Decks, because there are just so many good cards that this deck depends on that you only get 2 of. So if you got 2 Star Decks, you're able to have 4 of. But without that, it's just, there are some consistency issues, but the stuff that it does is very, very strong in a meta like this. So I'm talking about Sentomaru, Marshal D Teach, Gecko Moria, the Mihawk, as well as the Don Quixote. All of these cards are fantastically good, and if you could see them consistently, this deck is fantastic. But with only 2 ofs, that is kind of the way it goes. So Sentomaru is definitely 100% the card you want to hard mold for. It is so good. Especially going first, you just play this for turn 3, and then for 2 Dawn, you're able to play 1. It's technically 3 Dawn. You pay 2, and you have to attach a Dawn to it. You get to play a Pacifista from your deck. So that is such a good effect in something like this, where you're able to, like, you just do this, and then pay 2. And then you get the Pacifista, and the Pacifista is just this big 4-drop vanilla. That's a 6k, and you don't even have to swing for this effect. Like if this is an active, this is when attacking, this would be slightly worse because you'd have to leave this out here exposed. But since it is a activate main, you can just keep this out here and then do it again the next turn for another cost of 3. So for 3 costs, not only are you playing a 4-cost 6k body, but which is 1 cost reduction, but you also are technically drawing a card. The way that works is that since you're playing this from your deck and not out of your hand, you just generated a card for free, which is the same as like a +1. So it's such a good effect. Get so much value from something like this. And these 6k bodies are pretty, like, it just means like your opponent has to discard a card or 2 just to get out of the damage that one of these would be doing. So if you're drawing 1 card and your opponent's having to discard 2 cards, that's like a +3 swing kind of thing. So Very, very good. But you only have 2 of these, and you really want to see it every time, so that is kind of impactful there. Martial D Teach is like, so this is like the best card if you are going first, because you play this on turn 3 and then turn 2, and you then go from turn 3. If you are going second, this Martial D Teach is the best card. On turn 4, you just return 1 character with a cost of 3 or less to your opponent's hand. So they had turn 3, you have turn 4, just because of how the Dawn works. They have the 3 Dawn turn, you have the 4 Dawn turn. You just pay it for 4, and then they bounce the card back to their hand that they've played, and then you just have like a huge tempo swing just by playing this guy. Mihawk is like, you can sometimes play this card. You have to be careful how you do it. Being able to draw 2, discard 2 to cycle and find pieces you need is kind of good, but he's also a TK counter, so you have to be careful there. Gecko Moria is fantastic. He's like, you almost always want to run this card because it is a draw 1, and you get to choose which card you draw, and it's normally like another Draco Mihawk, which is, again, is a 2k counter. You get it back, but worst case, like, this just draws you a card that you can counter with, which is fantastic. And then also the Don Quixote Doflamingo. Return 1 character with cost of 7 or less to its owner's hand. So you just play this, you return something like one of their big bombs that they played the last turn back into their hand, like a 5/6 cost, and then you are really, really happy with the investment here. And that's just a 7k that you're able to swing in with, and it all feels quite good. Other than that, the Kuma is just good to help you guarantee like maybe the next draw is good, or at least seeing what your pieces are. There's some better decks for this look at top 3, but it's better than nothing. And if you have nothing better to do, if your hand's just dead, you don't have like if you're going second and you don't have a turn 2 play, this to maybe find a Sentomaru is worth it. You usually will whiff because it's just top 3 and you don't get to draw anything, you just rearrange the order, but it is something you can look into. Do I have anything else? Oh, the -4 effect. So the Crocodile's -4 effect is quite good. Actually, it main once return Dawn -4, return the specified Dawn to return 1 character with cost of 5 or less to its owner's hand. So you could use this to get rid of a blocker or just get a lot of tempo swing, which is also just really good because later in the game, like, you're just going to max out on Dawn, right? So like you go all the way up to 10 and not have anything to do with it. So just going like -4 here to bounce a card back into your opponent's hand, gain some tempo for it, does feel good, especially since this can bop like a blocker. Most blockers are 5 costs and less in this star deck meta, so being able to remove a blocker that is preventing you from just going all the way in for game can help you out a lot too. So something just to consider there. I do like the addition with it. Do notice that the proper sequencing for this too is that if you want to do it against anything besides like a blocker or something that interacts with your board, you want to do it at the end of your turn, not the beginning of it. And like I like instinctively you want to, like, the idea is like, oh, I'll bounce a card back to my opponent's hand and I'll start swinging. But if you give them something back that has a counter cost, it just means that they have 1 more card in their hand that they can be using defensively, and you don't want to give them more resources until they can't use those resources anymore, if that makes sense. So but yeah, blue's just really kind of tempo based. It's based around bouncing cards back to your opponent's hand, which right now is good, especially in a game with Summoning Sickness. I think it kind of trails off as we get the first set, because that just means that you'll be able to play a card with a good on play in their hand again. But I think it's pretty strong, and blue has like a lot of good cards for cycling and drawing, which I really like as well. So that is the Crocodile list, and we'll go to the last one now.
Eustass Kid.
And to end it out, we do have the Eustass Kid leader and starter deck, and I think it's pretty known that this is the best starter deck of the 4. It's so strong. The leader is strong. It's probably one of the best effects in the game, and the deck that it comes with does have a lot of fun tools and everything else. So active main, once per turn for 3, you get to discard a card from your hand, so this leader to active, which is so good in a game like this. Being able to have 2 swings on a leader in a game where there's Summoning Sickness just means, like, sometimes you just discard a card from your hand and your leader swings twice, and restanding something or switching things active is incredibly strong when there's such an easy way to power boost something. So you could make this a 12k leader, swing with it, and then pay 3 and you get another 12k attack. So for 10 Dawn, you get 2 12k attacks and you just discard a card from your hand is really good. That's very powerful. Your opponent's going to have to get a lot of defensive tools or blockers to get around that, and there's not a lot of that in these starter decks, so it's just in a good spot. So starting the game, you do want to find your Bonnie. This is the best card for you to start off with. It just costs 1. You look top 5 for a supernovas. It can be a copy of itself. It can be anything with this. Most of these cards are supernovas, like Law, like Eustass Kid, like X-Drake. All of those are those. And it doesn't say character cards specifically, so you can find event cards as well, like Straw Sword, which is a really good card to like interact with your opponent. Being able to rest something and then being able to swing into it with your Eustass Kid is strong there as well. We do have the like the X-Drake also is like most of the time you want to play your 4-drop like vanilla card, but this is just a better, strictly better, like from a lot of ways from a vanilla. So dawn times on your turn, when this card is rested, your leader and characters with Marines or Supernovas gains plus 1k. So you just put a dawn underneath him and then you can swing with him there. It's a 6k, but actually since he's suspended during the swing, it is, or sorry, rested, it's a 7k. So you get a 7k swing and then your leader becomes a 6k, which then you can use this effect to have 2 6k swings or buff him up either or more. Like it's just a strong effect that you're using 1 dawn and you're giving at least bare minimum plus 2k across 2 swing, or plus 1k across 2 swings, so a net of 2k. So it's a good investment there, and just another body to kind of attack with and stuff. So really do like this. It's only your turn, unfortunately, but like it'd be super duper broken otherwise. And the Basil Hawkins, we only have 2 of these boys, but if you play this exactly on turn 5, you do get some. It's just like a really imposing card for your opponent. It just means I get, if you swing into anything, I get to pop it for free because you make this a 7k swing. Once your turn, if this card bows or the opponent character such as active, and even if you use it to, like, let's say I have a blocker and I block, like if you swing into character, this will just say, well, I battle an opponent's character, so this will die unless they counter out of it, and I get to restand and I get to swing at your character again, or your leader again, as a 7k. So it's something just to consider there. I think it's strong, and it's dead in hand otherwise because it doesn't have a counter cost, but it's I highly recommend using this guy. Last thing is that this 7-drop Eustass Kid is so good if you're not playing against blue. If you're playing against blue, you can unfortunately never ever play this card. It's just going to be stuck in your hand because as soon as you play it, they're going to play staples. They're going to put it back into your hand, and then you just feel really bad for paying 7 to get countered by something that costs 4 the next turn. So do not play this card. It is a perfectly good card to discard from your hand off your Eustass Kid. And that's like part of the reason that Eustass Kid is so good too, is that you never have a dead card in hand because you can always just discard it with the leader effect to get the restand later in the game. So this is the flexibility in that. This can be like an aggressive deck, but this also has control aspects with like Basil Hawkins, with like Straw Sword, and just everything else. It just gets card draw, it gets interaction, and it's just very good. And it has like an end game win condition just baked into the leader. If you get to 10 dawn, you just get a lot of big swings with it. So that's going to be it for me in this kind of overview. If you guys learned something from this, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. It would mean a lot to me. Good luck for your super pre-releases. If you guys have any questions for anything that I said for this video, please let me know in the comments below. If I'm wrong about anything, let me know too. I would love to hear it. And that will be it for me. So again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.